I'm Basia Sokolowska, taking you through my creative alphabet. Today, I would like to talk about photographing, which is a very important, I would even say a leading medium, leading activity in my art making for many, many years. That's how I came into art making, by taking photographs. And I continued for many, many, many years until the Island series, which is the final chapter of the Homage project. Photographing is a very multifaceted activity. Most of photographs require a camera. I say most because there are also some prints. There is camera-less photography, which I used. I talk about it in the Green Glory episode of the series, when I made photographic portraits of plants by placing them directly on a photosensitive paper. For that, no camera was required. But in most of my photographic work, I used cameras, and these guys here are my, I would say, collaborators. They're not my tools, they're my collaborators. They're very special creatures, I would say, who in many ways determine the images that I made. I use different cameras for different purposes, depending on what sort of images I had in mind. When I first started photographing, I used a 35mm camera, which I bought from a colleague at work in Sydney, who had bought it in Tokyo when it was firstly released. It's a Nikon F, which comes with a very kind of solid back with a motor drive. And this camera was with me for, well, it's still with me, but in terms of taking photographs, I used it to make my first series of photographs, Carmen Infinitum, in 1990-1991, and then in 2004 I used it to make Chrysalis series. It was a very, very special time working with this camera. It's actually quite simple and fully manual, and that's what I like, because it allows me to control and explore the image and learn about how to work with this particular camera, as well as the camera. They are all very different. Most of them are fully manual. The camera that sort of agrees with me more than any other is my Hasselblad. It's a manual, it's a film camera, Hasselblad CM500, which I use to make many series of photographs, including the Islands, which is the last chapter of the Homage project, the Islands devoted to Agnes Martin. It is special because it's quite large, and handling it, its weight, the lenses, the weight of the lenses, the size, just the way it fits in my hands, and the physical aspect of handling it, as well as like working with the viewer and working with the lenses and changing the depth of field and kind of seeing it in the 6x6 viewer is quite an experience on its own. It's not just the images that come out from the working with the camera, but working with it is a wonderful experience for me. I think the physical aspect of handling cameras is quite important. And I think that's something that is a big part of my relationship with them. Each camera requires different way of putting your hands around it. Each has a different sound, uh, different sort of temperature, different texture, and I think that's kind of becomes part of the whole process of making images for me. It's not just about the technical parameters, the settings, but also the way it feels and the way it actually is present within the relationship, quite physical relationship. We talk about the body when we talk about the cameras without lenses. And I think cameras for me are also the bodies in the same way as plants are. So that's kind of essential in my photographing. Um, I like working with slow cameras. I like working with very old cameras like this sort of pocket camera from made before the Second World War. It's a Zeiss icon. Of course, that's the size of it. It's like a kind of largish mobile phone or a small um, iPad, a little bit heftier and bulkier, but I guess it's sort of, you could call it a pocket camera. And of course, in terms of looking through this camera, uh, is very uncomfortable. You can't really frame it properly, or look at this viewer, you see something very, very kind of small, and you don't really know where the frame ends and when it starts. And of course it has very basic settings, very sharp, very slow shutter speed, so you really need to have it standing. It's not really handheld camera except for when you use it outdoors in the bright light. But it's actually quite nice because working with slow cameras, they do two things. One thing, they are quite unpredictable uh, in the effects they produce, in terms of blaring or even strange things happening on the film. And the second aspect is actually quite psychological. It's something that I experience in particular while working with a pinhole camera. This is this box that my father made for me, but also with this camera or any other camera which I use to photograph on really, really long exposure time. And this, what I mean is standing by the camera while its shutter is open for half a minute or 5 minutes allows you to sort of absorb, because you can't really do much in those time. It's too short to go and make yourself a cup of tea, and you really want to kind of be as still as possible because the camera has to be still as well. So you stand next to it and you actually look at what the camera is looking at, and the way you absorb this image, you contemplate it, you notice different things. Is very different to when you take a photograph with a very high shutter speed. When you actually don't look at what you're photographing, you quite often look at it later when it's been photographed. So that time is actually quite special, and you sort of feel yourself like a camera, like absorbing this image, and the image somewhere in your brain through your eyes gets registered, as well as it gets registered on the negative in the camera. So that's actually quite special. And as much as I like photographing with my mobile phone like everyone else does these days, and it's wonderfully quick and instant, and you can do it anywhere, and it takes very little time, and you don't really have to process the image, you can share it straight away. Photographing for me is not really something I do with my mobile phone or very fast digital cameras, but it's something that for me happens when I work with manual and heavy, chunky cameras, which allow you for this kind of manual interaction with its body and its settings as well.